You can joke about the general's weight, but never ever question his taste. Everyone knows that Mercedes-Benz is the ride of choice for world leaders. So, seeing a president or prime minister in a Benz, totally normal, nothing special. But here's where Kim Jong-un stands out. North Korea's a country buried under UN sanctions. Luxury cars? Strictly banned. Big car brands? They all said, nope, not selling there. And yet, somehow, the number of luxury cars in North Korea hasn't gone down. It's actually gone up. So that raises one very fun question. How exactly are all these fancy cars sneaking their way into one of the most isolated countries on Earth? Today, let's take a joyful little ride through the luxury garages of North Korea's 3 generations of leaders and see what hidden stories come with those shiny wheels. Oh, and a friendly reminder before we start. Every luxury car mentioned in this video technically belongs to the people of North Korea. The general just happens to have 24-hour exclusive access. On June 12, 2018, history was made. For the first time ever, the sitting leaders of the US and North Korea met face to face. In the year leading up to that summit, our dear General Kim Jong-un had been stepping out of North Korea quite a bit, showing up on the world stage with some serious flair. When he flew to Singapore to meet President Trump, the general didn't use his own plane. He borrowed one from China. But for his second meeting with Trump in Vietnam, he went full vintage style, taking his personal armored train, all the way from Pyongyang through China, and finally rolling into Hanoi. Once he got there, for that final stretch from the hotel to the summit, the general decided to make an entrance. He switched to his car, surrounded by 12 men in identical black suits and flat-top haircuts, jogging in perfect formation beside his ride. The scene went viral instantly, but the real showstopper wasn't the running bodyguards. It was the car. Because Kim Jong-un wasn't riding in just any luxury car. He was cruising in a Mercedes Maybach S600 Pullman, the absolute top-tier model. Price tag? Around $1.4 million. To put that in perspective, the average North Korean makes about $1,500 a year, so buying one Maybach would take the combined yearly income of roughly 933 North Koreans, assuming, of course, they don't eat, drink, or live for an entire year. On June 18, 2024, the general stood waiting in Pyongyang, gazing longingly toward Moscow. After 24 long years, Russia's president, Vladimir Putin himself, finally came to visit North Korea again. The moment they met, the two greeted each other like old buddies. Big smiles, big hugs, lots of warmth for the cameras. Then, without missing a beat, Putin enthusiastically invited the general to hop into his own car so they could leave the airport together. Kim Jong-un had high hopes for this visit. He was looking to trade, offering weapons and ammunition support to Putin in exchange for a little something special, Russia's nuclear and missile technology. But come on, for Putin, that's probably his most valuable bargaining chip. He's not exactly the type to hand that out like a souvenir. So both leaders played the game, smiling, nodding, pretending not to understand what they both clearly understood. The next day, Putin personally took Kim out for a drive. They even switched seats and took turns behind the wheel, and the general was absolutely loving it. Putin, being the generous host, announced that he would gift Kim one of Russia's own luxury cars, an Urus Senate, often called the Russian Rolls-Royce. It's Russia's first homegrown high-end car brand, selling for somewhere between 40 and 80 million rubles, roughly $50,000 to $100,000. And of course, the one Putin gave Kim wasn't just any model. It was the armored version, reportedly even equipped with offensive defense systems. According to Russian media, Kim was absolutely fascinated by the beast, a 7-meter-long, 7-ton luxury tank on wheels. After the meeting, Kim's sister, Kim Yo-jong, graciously accepted the gift on his behalf and formally expressed the general's deep gratitude to President Putin. On August 10, 2024, North Korea's state media, KCNA, released a photo of the general inspecting flood damage in Wiju County, North Pyongyang province. According to the report, the general personally took his green train to the disaster zone, loaded, of course, with grain and relief supplies for the people. In one of the photos, a carriage door was open, and there stood the general himself, delivering a heartfelt speech to the disaster victims. With just a single camera shot, state media managed to capture the full extent of his boundless compassion and love for the people. Despite the scorching summer heat, the general stood tall in a perfectly pressed suit, occasionally wiping tears from the corners of his eyes. The crowd of disaster victims, all dressed in spotless, brand-new clothes, were also seen shedding tears, of gratitude, of course. But foreign media, ever so ungrateful, noticed something interesting from another angle. Inside that same green train, they spotted a brand-new Mercedes Maybach GLS 600. The contrast between the luxury SUV inside the train and the flood-stricken citizens outside was, well, let's just say, a little ironic. It seems the general really knows how to keep his work life and personal life perfectly separated. After all, the imperialists may try to corrupt his iron will with a Maybach, but clearly that's nothing more than wishful thinking. In recent years, the general has been showing off his growing collection of luxury rides, again and again, and that's made countries like the US and South Korea start to wonder, are these sanctions even working? I mean, if the general can cruise around in a Mercedes, like he's starring in his own car commercial, then something's definitely off. Even Mercedes' parent company, Daimler, started to panic a little. They rushed out a statement, insisting they've done absolutely nothing wrong. Through CNN, Daimler publicly declared, "Our company has had no business dealings with North Korea for over 15 years. We strictly comply with all EU and US sanctions, and we have comprehensive export controls in place to prevent our vehicles from being supplied to North Korea or any of its embassies worldwide." In short, they swear they have no idea how Kim Jong-un got his hands on those cars. But here's the interesting part. Buried in that same statement, Daimler added one little sentence. If our vehicles are sold through a third party, especially if they're pre-owned, that falls outside of our control and responsibility. Now that line is where things get interesting. It's basically a corporate version of, hey, don't look at us, we just make the cars. So that raises the big question. How exactly is North Korea, a country supposedly strangled by international sanctions, still able to import these ultra-luxury vehicles? Like it's no big deal? According to an 8-month joint investigation by the New York Times and a Washington-based nonprofit that specializes in tracking smuggling networks, we might finally have part of the answer. First off, buying a luxury car under a fake identity isn't exactly easy. Each North Korean embassy only has a handful of people, and they're watched very closely. So, buying a Mercedes through embassy staff? Yeah, that's not going to happen. The second method, though, is a lot safer. You find someone else to buy it for you. Let's say a new Maybach SUV hits the market, and the general decides, purely for the people's happiness, of course, to buy one. So what happens? A buyer with no links to North Korea, maybe a private individual, maybe a shell company, goes to a local Mercedes dealership and places an order for the Maybach. Since the buyer's identity looks totally normal, the dealership has no reason to turn down the sale. And if the car's bought secondhand, it's even easier. No one checks your background, and it's way harder to trace. After all, Mercedes can only track the first sale of the car. They can't possibly monitor where every single vehicle ends up after that. Next, a mysterious middleman or trading company steps in to handle the export paperwork. Of course, the shipping destination can't exactly be North Korea, so it gets listed as somewhere more believable, like South Korea, Japan, China, or Russia. Once all the paperwork is done, the car is packed into a shipping container and loaded onto a cargo vessel, headed to the declared destination. And once it's cleared customs and leaves the port, boom, half the job's already done. Up to that point, everything looks perfectly legal. No shady backdoor deals, no hacking, no secret agents. Pretty much anyone could pull it off. And that's exactly why Daimler can't really stop North Korea from getting a Mercedes, unless they somehow track down the actual payment trail. But the real magic happens in the next phase, the transport stage. To explain how it all works, let's go back to a real case from 2018. On June 20th, 2018, two brand new Mercedes S-Class sedans were carefully packed into two shipping containers, all perfectly legal, and sent off to the port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. From there, they were loaded onto a massive cargo ship and began their long journey across the sea. 41 days later, the ship arrived safely in Dalian, China, where the containers were unloaded and stored at the port. Then, on August 26th, the same containers were loaded again, this time onto a ship bound for Osaka, Japan. Once in Osaka, they were unloaded once more, and you guessed it, quickly loaded again, onto yet another cargo vessel, headed for Busan, South Korea. 3 days later, the containers arrived in Busan, unloaded again, and at this point, everything still looked perfectly fine. Every single step was properly documented, fully traceable, and 100% legal. No one, not even the strictest customs officer, could find a single red flag. But then, things got interesting. In early October, those same two containers, the ones holding the Mercedes sedans, were quietly loaded onto a ship, known only by its code name, DN5505. The vessel was officially scheduled to arrive at Nakotka port in Russia on October 5th. But somewhere along the way, the ship suddenly went dark. It switched off its AIS, the automatic identification system that tracks a vessel's location. And when a cargo ship carrying two luxury Mercedes just vanishes from the map, you know something shady is about to happen. Now, for those who don't know, AIS, or Automatic Identification System, is basically a tracking system installed on ships. It automatically broadcasts a vessel's location, speed, and route to nearby ships and coastal stations, so everyone knows where everyone else is. It's like marine traffic control, but automatic. Even without radar, AIS makes it easy to keep track of ship movements and helps prevent collisions at sea. By international rules, any large vessel is required to have AIS on at all times. The only reason it would ever stop transmitting is if the ship lost all power, or if someone very deliberately turned it off. So when a fully loaded cargo ship suddenly goes dark in the middle of its voyage, no signal, no trace, no explanation, it usually means one thing: somebody on board doesn't want to be found. And sure enough, 18 days later, the DN5505 finally reappeared in South Korean waters near Busan. But something was different. When it left port, it was carrying two shipping containers, each holding a Mercedes S-Class. Now, those containers were gone, completely vanished. Instead, the ship was loaded with over 2,500 tons of coal. According to the cruise report, they had successfully reached Nakotka, Russia, unloaded the containers there, then filled the ship with coal for the return trip. Sounds legit, right? Except, when investigators later checked port records, they found that the Nakotka Port Authority had no record whatsoever of the DN5505 ever arriving. Not even once. Then, on October 7, 2018, 3 massive Il-76 military cargo planes suddenly landed in Vladivostok, Russia. Not long after, they took off again, carrying some very interesting cargo. From those missing containers, investigators began to suspect that inside those planes were none other than the two vanished Mercedes sedans. Naturally, the DN5505 became the prime suspect. Now here's where things get messy. The DN5505 was owned by a Hong Kong-based company, but on July 27, 2018, it was quietly renamed DN5505, and its ownership was transferred to a shipping firm registered in the Marshall Islands, called Dongyang. Complicated enough? Oh, we're just getting started. When the ship was sailing, it was flying the flag of Togo, a small African nation. And as for the real owner of this so-called Dongyang company, there's no official record. But after months of investigation and interviews, researchers found strong evidence linking the operation to a Russian businessman named Daniil Kazachuk. Remember that 2,500 tons of coal the DN5505 brought back to Busan? According to South Korean customs data, that coal came from Nakotka port, the same ghost port that supposedly never saw the DN5505. And right next to Nakotka is Vladivostok, home of Mr. Kazachuk himself. According to flight records, on October 7, 2018, while the DN5505's AIS signal was still mysteriously offline, 3 cargo planes from Air Koryo, North Korea's national airline, landed in Vladivostok. Now, a North Korean cargo plane visiting Russia is already a very rare sight, but what made it even more interesting were the registration numbers on those aircraft. Investigators discovered that 2 of those planes were the exact same ones, later used by Kim Jong-un himself to transport his luxury cars during overseas visits. So the research team put the puzzle together. During those 18 missing days, the DN5505 likely delivered the containers, the ones carrying the Mercedes sedans, to Vladivostok in secret. Then, it sailed on to Nakotka, picked up a load of coal, and returned to Busan as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, North Korean officials quietly retrieved the cars from the port and brought them home to Pyongyang. However, the Center for Advanced Defense Studies, C4ADS, which conducted the investigation, made it clear in their final report there is no direct evidence linking the Air Koryo planes, the DN5505, and Russia's Far East operations together. So for now, we can only say this is a scenario that's very possible, but not officially proven. When asked about the incident, the North Korean embassy in Vladivostok declined to comment. Meanwhile, the Russian businessman Daniil Kazachuk spoke to investigators over the phone. He admitted that the DN5505 was indeed his vessel, but when asked about the delivery details, or whether the cargo ever actually made its way to North Korea, he had a very simple answer. Why on earth would I publicly disclose where I bought a car or who I sold it to? That's business confidential, you know? In fact, this method of transporting luxury cars isn't anything new. It's been used for years. So why can't authorities just intercept it completely? The answer comes down to a few key points. First, from the very beginning, nobody really knows who actually bought these 2 Mercedes. Daimler says they usually perform background checks on potential buyers to make sure they're not selling to someone who intends to violate international sanctions. But in another statement, Daimler admitted they have no way of controlling what happens once a car is sold to a third party. For example, if North Korea wants a Mercedes, they're not going to walk into a dealership in Dandong, China, and place an order themselves. No, they'll always go through a middleman. And on top of that, in many countries, the paperwork for car sales is shockingly simple. There's basically no way to block North Korea from buying luxury vehicles. Even if dealerships tried to tighten control, North Korea could always buy brand new second-hand cars. Because, let's face it, most sellers couldn't care less who the buyer is. As long as the buyer has enough money, the seller is more than happy to hand over the keys. Nowadays, North Korea has plenty of ways to pay for luxury items, including Bitcoin, so trying to block these purchases by monitoring payment methods. Good luck with that. And honestly, all of what we've discussed so far is just the tip of the iceberg. The report also points out that, between 2015 and 2017, around $190 million worth of luxury goods were funneled into North Korea through more than 90 countries. Clearly, the general will go through whatever trouble it takes to get his hands on luxury cars. And that should tell you something about his passion for automobiles. This love for fancy rides is probably inherited. Back in the 1960s, Kim Il-sung managed to get his hands on the then fashionable Mercedes W100, and yes, it was a long wheelbase model. By the 1990s, both Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il were riding around in the Mercedes SW140. They also acquired a healthy number of Cadillacs and Lincolns, which back then were the ultimate symbols of American luxury. In fact, at Kim Jong-il's funeral, people even saw a Lincoln hearse. Personally, I like to imagine that Kim Jong-il wanted to lie down in that tiny Lincoln to contemplate the limitations of capitalism. In North Korea, luxury cars aren't just the general's favorite toys. They've also become a status symbol for the elite. At the end of 2013, the Workers' Party held the 8th Central Committee, 9th plenary session. KCNA carefully edited footage of high-ranking officials arriving, showing off 4 Mercedes S-Class sedans in a row. And of course, these were clearly gifts from the general, given to show appreciation for his loyal subordinates. So, the general's cars are technically the people's cars. And no, this is not a joke.